my strategy is my target. I narrow it down so hard that every note I send to someone, even though everyone gets the same exact email that is not personalized, it's not customized, it's so relevant that it doesn't even need anything.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 47, a 4th of July special episode of Sales Stories in Real Life. I'm your host, Alex Bruschi, and this is the show where professional salespeople share stories about their memorable buying experiences. We're actually going to change it up a little bit this episode. We're going to actually have a selling story, and to deliver the selling story, we've got the one, the only Julia Carter. She was recently promoted to AE at Marpipe after being a successful SDR, which included hitting 400% of her quota. And Julia, I hear you had some pretty interesting experiences selling jeans during the pandemic when everyone was wearing sweatpants. How the heck did you pull that off?
Oh my God. Yes. Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so very crazy. So I graduated during the pandemic, which was a very weird time to graduate, very hard to get a job. But so I just took up all these kind of random jobs and I worked at this really nice like boutique in Connecticut. Like, the cheapest thing in there was like $100 like t-shirt, like dresses, 300-400 bucks, jeans, 250. Like it was expensive. But we had all this like merchandise that we needed to get out, and people would kind of shop, like obviously like masks and all this stuff, which was, you know, a vibe, never forget. But people would come in and always like be buying like all of our sweats, like those would sell out. But we obviously had like store quotas we needed to hit, because if we went over, I would get a bonus and I would get a bunch of credit. And I was like, well, I want all these nice clothes, so I need to sell some stuff. So one thing I got really, really good at selling was jeans, very randomly, which was honestly a big feat considering the pandemic. But I think one of the things that I did was I would try on all the jeans and honestly all the clothes in the store when they came in with new shipments. And I'm not super tall, so I'd figure out, okay, like this would look good on a tall person, this looks good on a short person, like all these different things. So whenever someone would walk in the door, I would kind of just like size them up. I'm like, okay, like they're taller, like this cut would look amazing on them. And I would kind of just like present them to them like, oh my God, you should like try these on. And then honestly, 9 times out of 10, people would always buy like my recommendation over the stuff that they pulled. And we would crush it.
I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's so nuanced in a way because
I
especially,
know.
well, I mean, first off, got to acknowledge again, like this is a time when everyone's wearing sweatpants, right? Like nobody's going
Literally.
out, nobody's doing anything. And so, like you said, all the sweats and all the kind of comfy clothes are selling out. And I'm sure you've just got stockpiles of jeans on jeans and, all these like fancy clothes that no one's using anymore. And
Yeah.
so you kind of found this little avenue, let's just say, that you could take where people were willing to buy jeans, but it was because you were making very educated suggestions, right? They weren't just walking in and you were like, hey, buy jeans, right? And they were like, oh yeah, let's do it. You were actually trying on the clothes and saying like, oh, this would fit good on someone with this build. This would fit good on a tall person, right? This would fit good on a whatever person. And so I think that there's a lot of takeaways for B2B that we could pull from this, because like if number one, you don't know your product inside and out, how the heck are you going to
Yeah.
communicate the value to somebody else? But like even more so, like I think the magic of what you were doing is you were like putting yourself in these people's shoes. Like, of course, you wanted some clothes for yourself, and I'm sure like trying on clothes is fun and everything, but like you're trying on clothes for the purpose of seeing who this would fit well and who it would look good on. So maybe kind of talk us through like what were other people at the store doing, right? That maybe weren't having as much success. And was there kind of an aha moment for you when you sort of realized like, hey, if I kind of try it on and I put myself in these shoes, like then people will really start to buy? Or what happened there?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, like It was really important because we obviously needed to like stay in business, and staying in business in COVID was really, really hard, especially like working in retail. So for me, I was kind of like, okay, like in order to get some of this stuff off, like not only do I have to provide like, decent recommendations to people, but also like kind of selling the dream a little bit with like, oh my God, like when we can actually like go out, like this dress would look so good, like all these types of things. But besides the clothes, I mean, clothes are clothes, but I think you make a good point about making like an educated sort of suggestion to someone that's genuine. Like every suggestion that I made was a genuine suggestion. I wasn't just like, oh, I need to get rid of all this product. Like sometimes people would pick something up and I'm like, that actually looks really bad. Like on, it's really uncomfortable. They don't stretch. They're not really cute, but like these ones look like the same, but they fit so much better. So like pick this one. So I think just putting yourself in their shoes, like what would you want, is in understanding the product too, I think was like really, really helpful. But like the other people weren't necessarily like they were also we were all kind of like tag teaming and following along together because we all had like a group goal. So that was definitely something we would all just like make suggestions. But people always were like, Julia's the jean person, so like talk to her, don't talk to me.
Hey, you kind of like established your sort of niche, let's just say, as the
I
gene
know.
person. And I think you bring up a really great point, which is like when you tell people that they're not a fit, or like you tell people that something is not good, right? Like, and you kind of like give that dose of realness, not like, hey, everything here is amazing and perfect, buy whatever you want, right? Like when you're
Yeah.
saying like, hey, these really aren't that comfortable, these really aren't that stretchy, like you may want to actually look at this instead. Like you're like building a ton of trust in that process, right? Because it's kind of like a pattern interrupt for people that are constantly just expecting salespeople to just kind of shove stuff down their throat. So I think that's kind of a really interesting thread to keep pulling on. Do you ever notice that in your B2B selling where like sometimes you got to just tell someone like, hey, you're not a great fit, or like, hey, I don't think you'd be a good fit for this feature or this widget, but you may be a better fit for this feature or this widget, or how would that translate to B2B for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, keeping the trust open with some people and just figuring out like their process and really understanding like at a core like what you actually do and if you can actually help this person. Obviously, you want to like, show them like, oh, like with our product we can really make your life better, but like can you make their life better? That's kind of up for grabs for a lot of people. And I think to yeah, just like being able to make educated like recommendations. But even going through pricing, I know a lot of companies price things out maybe by like certain packages or features or things like that. And I think when walking through pricing, highlighting each sort of feature and like who it's good for, who it's not good for, and like relating back to them, like, oh, like you guys are like a huge enterprise, like a lot of people like in enterprises want like really fast communication, so like our clients blah 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 like opt in for the extra like private Slack channel. You don't have to, but like if you fit that mold, like that's a useful item. And things like that I found to be good, like especially walking through pricing, like discounting certain things, like not discounting but like taking away like, hey, like you don't need this, like don't buy this, but be like, oh, like you kind of described this earlier so that you might find that useful.
That all kind of goes back to the point of like you really got to not only like master your product and your services and what problems you're solving, but like who you're solving them for, right? Like
Yeah.
you're kind of like putting on a master class of like knowing your personas of like, hey, these personas, right? Like they really fit well with this, and this, right? This persona fits really well with this, and this. So for someone, let's say, who maybe is kind of having some trouble figuring out like what personas enjoy what, or whatever, or what sort of widgets fit best for which persona or whatever, how would you kind of recommend people bucket their different personas? And how would you suggest them sort of testing what works best for each of those personas?
Yeah, totally. I think that's like the $1 million question that so many companies are still trying to figure out. But I think first, like just going in really, really narrow with like who is like a perfect fit for like X, Y, and Z. And whether you're like looking at your current customers, you're just looking at like, I don't all the options out there. It is hard, but I just prefer like there's so many people who could like in theory benefit from my product, but I just prefer to just stay really, really tight with like the sort of top people. who like really would be a sort of like cookie cutter fit. And in terms of bucketing, like if you're more of an all-in-one solution, I'd kind of evaluate like, okay, who are like our three main groups who like use this, like why do they use this? And then kind of tailor all your like messaging and all your demos, obviously, to them. But if you're more of a point solution, it's a bit easier because you probably just have like a couple types of people you're interacting with. So it's not quite as difficult, not difficult, but there's not as much like switching back and forth, I think. Yeah.
No, that's a good distinction too between like a platform and like a point solution. And so like I guess maybe let's just like spell it out in plain language. Like what would you define as like a platform and what would you define as a point solution? Because I think you're going down a good path here.
Yeah. So my, like, for example, my company, we're more of like a point solution. We basically design this very specific ad type. Like that's all we do. We just design it. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. That's the thing. Whereas at my previous role, I worked at this company, which kind of helped with also with ads. It kind of helped making like the creative parts of the ad. It helped like manage the campaign. It helped do the reporting. So there's kind of like a lot of more buckets invested there, versus with a sort of point solution where you can kind of be like, okay, like these people can use my product. But when you have lots of different features, I think it's key to just be like, hey, like retailers love this, finance companies love this, or certain things, so you can like really tailor your messaging. And honestly, it makes you sound much more educated, and like you can like really prescribe them something that would like be relevant to them, because no one wants to hear about stuff that they don't care about.
The word prescribe excuse me, the word prescribe really stands out because like that of course makes you think of like a doctor, right? Like, and a doctor needs education and a doctor needs to like do the sort of discovery, right, to like make a sort of diagnosis and then sort of prescribe based on that versus kind of like we were talking about earlier, like, hey, we need to sell jeans, just like push jeans onto everyone. So I think that's kind of cool there. And I like this. I like this persona conversation because we've not really gone in the weeds on this before in a previous episode. So let's keep going down that. Obviously, you're talking about like different companies and different industries. Obviously, that's a great way to bucket people. Obviously, you talked about size, hey, you're an enterprise, or hey, you're a little bit maybe more of a startup. Any other sort of ways that you would bucket people, or are those kind of the main ones?
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm prospecting like for my company, I stay very pretty much like end users or people who like would actually understand, like who would use my product in their day-to-day life. I find that going after people like that, like if they love your product, they'll convince their like CEO or whatever to buy it for you, or for them. Like if I went to my CEO and I was like, hey, like I really, really need this service, like it would make my life so much better, blah, blah, blah. Like they're probably gonna let me buy it. So I think just like evaluating who the end user is, like whether that's like a manager, an associate, a director, like really any people like that. But I think just keeping things pretty simple, like, okay, like these specific titles at these types of companies doing whatever trigger event your thing triggers. I don't care if it's like if the company's growing, if they're, I don't know, using a certain platform, whatever the trigger is, that's like the most important part. But if you could get a good trigger with a sort of right title at the company type that fits you best, like you're good to go.
You're really kind of like mastering your space as far as like who do I reach out to, who's my end user, what size are we going for, right? So I like what you said earlier, it's a really narrow scope, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're shooting for bullseyes, like you're not shooting to
Yes.
hit the target. And that's kind of how selling needs to be these days, like people are not getting
Yes.
nice to haves, people are only getting the must haves. And when you know your persona based on interest and size and end user, right, and you really understand that scope very well, then you could just consistently shoot bullseyes. So I like that.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this and we didn't plan this, but I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot here.
Do it.
You're obviously very funny on LinkedIn, and I feel like
Thank
one of
you.
your like sort of hottest takes that you have is about like emailing, right? Like
Yes.
obviously like personalizing email is kind of like a very, let's say, polarizing topic. Like some people
Mhm.
are like, you got to go all in on personalizing. Some people are totally kind of the opposite. Where do you stand on that and why?
Okay, so first of all, I mean, do what works for you, okay? But like I have so many hot takes. So even if it works for you, I'm just gonna shit on it anyway. So basically, in my humble opinion, like personalizing is different from customizing, is different from relevant stuff. So I think in theory, sending everyone a lovely, personal, customized note is great. But you know what? I'm the only AE at my company and I like have a lot to do and I'm full cycle and I do all outbound. So I don't have time to write like 1,000 notes that are like so beautiful. But what I do think is I just send my strategy is my target. I narrow it down so hard that every note I send to someone, even though everyone gets the same exact email that is not personalized, it's not customized, it's so relevant that it doesn't even need anything. So, like, for example, if you first hit them with context, like why exactly them? You're not just like, oh, congrats on the new role. I saw you went to Denison. That's so awesome. Or like, nice job being the VP of marketing. Your life must be so busy. Like, no, that is bad. Like something really specific. Like, I saw you're running white background dynamic product ads on Facebook. That's pretty specific. And then you just kind of like give a bit more context, like, hey, have you ever tried like doing X, Y, and Z with them? Like, let me know if that, like, here's an example. Let me know if that seems good. So, like, you don't need to personalize any of that because it just takes so much time. Your email's probably not even landing in their inbox. And like, it's just honestly like, that's not going to make me buy from you. Like, sending me a nice note isn't going to make me like, be like, wow, I need the solution. Cause like if it's not relevant to me, then why do I even care?
I'm very much with you. Well, first off, like do what works for you, right? Like if
Totally. Like
you're
if they're working, do it. But
right, like if you're an enterprise seller and you have 10 accounts that you're working, like yeah, I'm sure,
yeah,
you know, you need to be a little bit more personalized, but for you,
totally.
like you're the only AE, you're full cycle, you're doing all the outbound, you're closing the deals, so like there's only so many hours in the day. But where I largely agree with you is that relevancy is always like the number one most important thing. And I love that example that you shouted out of like, hey, I saw you're running I forget exactly what you said, you know, what
Yeah,
white
yeah.
space Facebook, right? Like that
Yeah,
is ultra crispy and that is ultra specific. And then that even creates a lane of like, hey, I know my stuff in this area, right? Like people don't
totally.
normally reach out with that kind of specificity. But I mean, even for myself, like if someone emailed me and said like, hey Joe, you know, I have a really snuggly golden retriever that's really lazy and you know he really needs a home, like you could call me whatever name you want, right? Like
Yeah.
as long as it's relevant, I'm in. So I think you're onto something here. What would you sort of recommend to people that say maybe their emails aren't exactly landing, right? And maybe their relevancy isn't quite as crispy as they would hope to be, right? Like, how would you sort of recommend that they kind of take it to the next level and start getting some replies and some meetings and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I think it can be really hard, especially when like a lot of the emails you're traditionally given are very much like, oh, my company, you know, helps save you time. Like we work with these customers, we save them, you know, 20% of whatever, and we can really help you do all this stuff. And I think like my sort of train of thought is like take what's in your cadence and just kind of invert it and make it all about like the customer and nothing about yourself. So don't say my company or anything like that. And like first think about, okay, like what specific challenge like do I solve that like relates to the trigger event why I'm reaching out to them. So if you help like SDR teams who are growing rapidly, like help you know, onboard people, be like, hey, like your team has been growing a ton. You know, just like starting off with the context, something like that that's like very clear. And if your solution does a bunch of stuff, just like focus on the one thing that's like really gonna hit home for them and just kind of go there. And then I like to ask them a few questions about like relating back to my product. So I'm like, oh, like would designing your ads, like making them look on brand like this be interesting? Like I'm not saying, oh, Marpipe is the leading branding ad solution software. It's like, oh, like, would this be something kind of cool? and then just really soft CTAs. And just keep it really short and provide some examples and be more helpful than salesy. Like the goal is not to like get them to, book all this time. It's like, hey, you're building awareness. Like people will probably reply. Some people will say yes. But yeah, always leading with like why them, and then just a couple of questions, keep it like consultative.
That's a big shift from the I to the you, and I think you put it perfectly. So I'm not even gonna like pile on top of that. That's it. We'll make that into a nice clip. But Julia, we got a lot of B2B sellers that are listening to the show. I think we're kind of like in this realm already, so it ties together really nicely. Folks that are still listening, we appreciate you. If people could take away one thing from this episode, right? Like if they could walk away from this 4th of July episode with
Yes.
the Julia herself, what would be like the one takeaway that you'd want people to get from this?
Oh gosh. I think one is just like know your damn product, know who it helps, know how it helps, and know the exact people who it helps. And like, if you really believe in something, like if you literally believe that your product is so amazing and it really will help these people like excel, like the rest, you'll just come off as so helpful and consultative. You're not going to come off as like, oh, well, buy all these features. It's like, you're so helpful. You really believe in it and you really know it. And I think that's something that a lot of people kind of miss because it's hard. Like a lot of the softwares are something like we don't relate to. Like I don't work in digital marketing, but I also know like our product is sick and it makes people a lot of money and it makes everything look really good. So why wouldn't you?
You've put that same takeaway on display this whole episode. Like I can really see like like I said, like a bullseye of like who you're
Yes.
reaching out to, why, what they're gonna do with it. So that's awesome. Great takeaway. Julie, this has been a blast. Why don't you plug something with the audience here before we jump?
Oh my gosh. Well, everyone, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the Slatey if you want to find my account. If you like seeing roasts, I roast a lot of people in comments. I have a lot of hot takes. Keeping it light and real. So definitely feel free to check me out. You can, drop me a hate message too if you feel like it. Yeah, but very excited to have been here. Thank you, Alex.
You bet. This was a blast. Go follow Julia on LinkedIn. I can attest to the roasting, the
Yeah.
hilarity, the hot takes. No,
Yes.
seriously, this has been a blast. I know the people are going to love this one. Sales Stories in Real Life, fam. We will see you next week. Cheers.